recording. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the FUSE 2026 workshop. My name is Diogo Pinheiro. I'm the Assistant Director for CURCA, and with me here today is Alison Grindel, who is the Program Coordinator for CURCA. And we're going to talk about the basics of the FUSE program that we have and how to apply for it. So this is going to be recorded, and at the end of it, we will upload it so that people, if they want to refer back to this presentation, they can. And then, of course, after the presentation, we'll take any questions that you might have. So we're going to talk about FUSE 2026 here. And the first thing to understand is that FUSE is part of our efforts to support undergraduate research. And here we have to kind of define undergraduate research as we see it, right? Which is an inquiry or investigation conducted by an undergraduate student that makes an original intellectual or creative contribution to the discipline, right? And here we want to really emphasize the creative part, right? In other words, we're not just supporting your traditional scientific fields, right? If you're in the arts, if you're in the humanities, and you have a student who, you have a project that's going to be making some sort of creative contribution, it fits under us here, right? So don't feel that just because your field maybe doesn't have research in the traditional sense of thinking about like a lab science or something like that, that you shouldn't be included, right? We include all disciplines and all majors on the UNG campuses, right? So as long as there's something creative here, you can be in film and theater and drama and whatever else, and it is covered by FUSE. So let's talk a little bit about what the FUSE program is, right? So mentors are going to be working with students for 8 weeks during the summer so that these students can get professional development, presentation experience, research experience, and so on and so forth. And here, I want to really emphasize this part of this program, right? We are the undergraduate research office. We are not the National Science Foundation. We are not the National Endowment for the Humanities. In other words, it's not about whether you have a great project. It's about what the students are going to be getting out of it, right? You can have the greatest idea in the history of humanity, an idea that would win all the Nobel Prizes for all the disciplines. But if at the end of the day, you would just have undergraduate students, cleaning beakers in your lab, that's not what we're trying to promote here, right? Our goal here is the student participation, the student involvement, right? That's where we're going to be evaluating submissions from, right? So during these 8 weeks that will take the course over the summer, we're going to have 4 group meetings and 4 student workshops. Faculty have to attend all 4 group meetings, right? They don't necessarily have to attend all the workshops, but they'd have to attend all the group meetings. And all the students must attend all the meetings and workshops, right? The idea here is we want mentors to be present. We want mentors to be kind of imparting that experience and that mentoring to these students, right? So students are hired to work 40 hours per week. But the faculty members submitting their proposals can kind of break down that one full-time student into multiple parts, right? In other words, if instead of having one student working 40 hours a week, you want to have 2 working 20 hours a week, 4 working 10 hours a week, we can accommodate that, right? The idea is that the funding will be the equivalent of 1 full-time student. If you want to split it up into more students, that's fine, right? And in terms of funding, we generally have been able to fund about 6 groups every summer. The compensation happens throughout the summer, right? Like students are paid in the usual way that workers are paid, right? Students will be paid $12 an hour. Professors will get a $4,000 stipend, and there will also be $500 for supplies, right? And so if you have a research group where more than 1 faculty member is going to be applying for the same project, that stipend can be divided between different faculty members. In terms of timeline, the proposals are due February 9th by essentially midnight via InfoReady. So info-ready is where you're going to be submitting everything. And then we hope to notify all the awardees by early March, and then they'll have meetings with us to talk about hiring, program requirements, et cetera, so that we can list the positions for student workers in late March, April, and so that we can hire them this way, right? The program dates specifically are going to be between June 1st and July 24th, right? So that's the 8 weeks of the program. So we start June 1st, we end on July 24th. And so applications are going to be due on InfoReady, right? So if you go to ung.infoready4.com, that's where you're going to see our competition. In terms of preparing your applications, keep in mind that we are going to be using reviewers, and these reviewers can come from any field, right? It's going to be unlikely that you're going to be just reviewed by people in your discipline or in your field, or even in the general kind of scientific area, right? So make sure that you're writing a proposal in lay terms in a way that people from all disciplines who may not have any background in your specific field can understand. In terms of the elements of the application itself, the main thing is going to be this project narrative, which is going to be 3 pages max, where you're going to talk about the project description, the significance of that project, the long-term contribution to UNG, your plan to mentor your students, goals and expected products, and the timeline, right? What you expect to happen at different points during the summer, and then, of course, beyond the summer, if it's something that applies. Besides that, you should have a budget. You should fill out the staff template for student researcher job description. If you have been funded by Fuse before, right, or any kind of funding where you were the one who got it, not the student who got it, you should have submitted a report to us, and we've contacted you before about these reports, so that we are going to take a look at whether the goals were met, right? This here is kind of like a pass-fail thing. It's not something that is going to influence your score. Nowadays, the formula is the same for everybody. We just want to make sure that people are not consistently over-promising, right? In other words, if this is the 3rd time that you're going for Fuse and you're always promising that you're going to have a paper at Science and you never publish at Science, right? We want to be able to take that into account, right? And then there's going to be a bunch of certifications about understanding these details that we require of everybody. Now, in terms of how you're going to be evaluated, what we do is we're going to get your applications, and we're going to share them with the reviewers that we have for Fuse, right? Generally speaking, we'd like to have either 3 or 4 reviewers per application, so that it's not just one person reviewing these things. And as I said, these reviewers can be from all disciplines, all majors, all departments from within the UNG. So write with that in mind, right? And so it's it's important, and it's very useful to write your application with the rubric that we're going to talk about in mind, right? So in terms of the rubric, right, what's going to happen, we're going to give these applications to our reviewers, and we're going to ask them to score things based on this rubric, right? And so the first item is going to be the project description, which is going to be stuff like originality, methodology, et cetera, where you're going to describe your project, right? And so the exceptional here application is going to describe in clear, concise, and easy to understand language what is original, what is innovative, what is creative about your project, why your methodology is sound, why your methodology is complete, and how it kind of reflects an understanding of your field, right? So that's the ideal here for this part, right? And this here is going to be scored at 1.5 times its value, right? And so it's an important part of the application. Next, the next element of the rubric is going to be significance, right? Here we want to see how this particular project fits within the broader field that you're a part of, right? You have to make an argument that whatever it is that you're doing has some sort of significant. It's the so what part of your application, right? Where you're going to have ideally an impact that extends just beyond the very specific niche field that you might be coming from, right? So that's another element of the rubric. Next, we're going to be talking about the long-term contributions to UNG, and this is another important element of the rubric. How is this going to kind of help us create and foster this culture of undergraduate research at UNG, right? How is this going to perhaps create some sort of engagement with students beyond just those 8 weeks, right? And so how is this going to kind of play a part in the UNG long-term efforts to promote undergraduate research, right? And then next is going to be the most important item of the rubric, right? Which is going to be your plan for your collaboration with the students. As I said, we are the undergraduate research office, right? The reason that we have this program isn't because we are trying to substitute the NSF. The reason that we have this program is that we want to make sure that our students are having a kind of an important creative signature experience as part of their undergraduate education, right? And so here, in terms of that plan, we want to see not only that there's a plan, but that the students are going to be involved creatively in whatever the project it is, right? They're going to have some sort of input. They're not just going to be in the back of the lab scrubbing, beakers and picking up coffee, right? And so we want to see how you're going to involve these students so that they can have a better understanding of research, of professional development, et cetera, in your field, right? We don't want students to just be doing menial tasks. We don't want them to just be observing. We want them to be engaged, right? Which is also part of why we want faculty to be here for the meetings where the faculty participate in. So this is going to be scored at twice the value of the basic elements of the rubric. Next, we're going to have goals and expected products, right? In other words, what do you want out of this? Are you thinking about this as something that will lead to student presentations and conferences, maybe a co-authored publication, maybe participation in a professional conference, an undergraduate only conference? What is it that you're trying to get at here, right? Now, this part here, it's important to not overpromise, right? Because as I mentioned before, if you ever try to apply for a FUSE grant again, we want to be able to see that you don't have to necessarily have met everything that you said that you were going to achieve, but we have to see that you came closer, or at least you try to come close, right? So don't come here and say, oh, we're going to publish 5 articles in Nature, 3 in Science, and win a Nobel Prize in our field, right? We want to see something realistic and something that we can kind of hold you to afterwards if you decide to apply for this again. And then timeline, this is scored the least of all, but we just want to see something realistic, right? What are you planning on doing with your students? Will these 8 weeks be enough? Are you going to be extending these things beyond these 8 weeks, and will they be in a feasible, sustainable way? Can you complete the stuff that you're promising that you're going to complete, right? So that's something. And then, as mentioned, if you have gotten a FUSE award before, you should have either submitted a report to us, or you should submit a report if you won it recently, so that we can take a look and see that the things that you promised you were going to get the last time around, well, you at least made your best effort and came close in some way, right? We don't want to have a kind of a culture of people over-promising, never delivering, and then keeping getting funded again and again. So for this part here, right, the report which you might have already submitted to us, but if not, you submit it here. It's going to be like that 2-page report where you talk about the stuff that you promised that you would do and that you actually did the last time that you got a FUSE award, right? So the formula based on the rubric is this one, right? The project description is scored at 1.5. The plan for collaboration is scored at twice the amount, and timeline is scored at half the amount, which means that you can get a 56 as a maximum score, right? And so here we're going to submit this to the reviewers. It's not going to be me. It's not going to be Allison deciding who wins or who loses, right? We're going to give the reviewers the rubric, and we're going to give them the applications, and they are going to be the ones who are going to score it, right? It's not just going to be one person. Normally, we've been settling on 3 people. It normally depends on how many submissions we have, right? So normally we have about 3 people at least, sometimes 4, review each application to make sure that we have some sort of consistency in the scores, right? And so it's very important to write to the rubric because, as I said, it's not going to be me and it's not going to be Allison. It's not going to be Anastasia making these decisions. The reviewers are going to have the rubric and your application in front of them. So make sure that the items in the rubric are addressed and that you're kind of following the rubric. Now, besides that application, you're going to have to submit a budget, and the maximum amount that we can you pay for supplies and materials is $500, right? So we're going to need a detailed budget, including kind of the categories of expenditures. If you have a particular set of equipment that you need, make sure that you have like the catalog number, link, etc., right? Travel is only allowable if it's related to the completion of the project. In other words, we can pay for travel if it's for the conduct of research, not for the presentation of research, right? For presentation stuff, we have travel grants. It's a different competition, right? But if you need to access a particular lab, a particular archive, a particular, whatever, and that is part of your project, travel is permitted within those $500, but again, it has to be for the conduct of research, not for the presentation. With any and make sure that when you're filling out the budget that you're realistic and that you're thinking about these things, because any expenditures outside of the budget will need prior approval to be done, right? Keep in mind that as a state institution, we have lots and lots of restrictions on what we can and cannot spend. So if it's something that you think might be within the bounds of stuff that the state prohibits, make sure that you check with us so that we can double check with the state regulations to make sure that whatever you're trying to spend money on is allowable, right? Now, keep in mind that once you are awarded FUSE and you have those $500 to spend, all purchases must be done by April 30th of this year so that we can fit it all under our budget for this year. So that's part 2 of the application, and it's going to be that budget, right? Next, we're going to have this template, which is going to be the student researcher job description, where you're supposed to provide with a general summary of the position, the activities that are required, and the job specifications, right? If a student needs to have had some particular class, if they need to have certain licenses, certain certifications, etc., all of that has to be done here, right? And note that students, for them to be able to get this position, they cannot have graduated already. They have to have at least 1 more semester after the summer, right? In other words, the earliest that they could be graduating is December of this year, right? So keep that in mind. Now, the other thing to keep in mind here is that when we're making this sort of these decisions, we're going to follow HR's rules for hiring, right? You cannot promise a job to anyone before the job is listed. You cannot make a decision before the hiring process is completed. Can you have someone in mind? Sure, just don't tell us or HR about it, right? And keep in mind that it will have to go through the regular hiring process, right? Which means that if you end up with multiple applicants for that position, you're going to have to kind of go through the process of selecting them for some reason, right? And at the same time, keep in mind that when you're filling out these job requirements and job specifications, right? Again, we have to follow HR rules, right? So if you say that a student needs to have something, and then this perfect student comes along and applies for it, and they don't have that certification, well, we can't bend the rules, right? If it's something is listed, it's listed. And then the last thing is going to be these certifications. What do we mean by them? As you're in the process of submitting, there's going to be all these check boxes that you have to make sure that you have done these necessary steps, right? So in other words, have you discussed your application with your department chair, and that whatever you get from us and whatever you get from like teaching in the summer cannot exceed more than 27% of your academic salary, right? Second thing that you have to check and certify that you're committed to mentoring the undergraduate student on a continuous basis, right? In other words, you have to be involved. You cannot be an absentee mentor, right? If you're the next is that if you're working on anything that will include human participants or personal data, that you're going to be going through the IRB process, even if it's just to get an exemption. There's next, it's that you understand that you have to attend the group meetings in person, and that students are required to attend group meetings in person. If there's one meeting, for example, that you can't because of something that is very specifically academic, etc., talk to us. We can figure that stuff out. But you should plan on being there for all in-person meetings, right? And then at the end, you're going to submit the mentor survey, and that you're going to submit a post-award report summarizing the outcomes of your project, right? So that if you don't ever provide that report in the future, we might not be able to consider your submissions. So in terms of questions that we generally get asked, how do you know if your project is appropriate for CURCA? Well, if it is something creative and if it's something that involves undergraduates, it should be available. It should be something that we are interested in funding, right? It's not limited to the sciences, as I mentioned. As long as it's creative in some way, right? It can be in the humanities, in the arts, whatever other fields, right? The way that we rank proposals is based on the scores from the reviewers, right? Some of you that I've seen here have reviewed for us in the past, so you're familiar with the process. I, as the chair of the committee, do not nudge, do not score, do not push people in any way, right? We give the rubric and applications to the reviewers. We try to make sure that each panel, each application will get at least one person who's relatively familiar with the field and one person who's completely new to the field, so that we can keep that balance going for everybody. Next, if you have a question about whether you can teach during FUSE, yes, but remember, and this is beyond CURCA, this is a university regulation, your summer pay cannot exceed 27% of your yearly salary, right? So if you're teaching during the summer and you're getting the stipend from us, you have to keep that in mind, right? And students can take classes during FUSE, but it should be limited to 4 course hours during each session of the summer that includes the FUSE program, right? You can, in terms of how many students can you have, again, we're paying 40 hours a week. You decide if it's going to be 1 student full-time, 2 students part-time, 4 students quarter-time, that sort of stuff, right? And you can also have more than 1 faculty in the same project, and which would then split the stipend between the faculty involved, right? The meetings are going to happen during those 8 weeks during the summer. During those 8 weeks, we're going to have 4 student workshops that students have to attend and 4 group meetings that students and mentors have to attend, right? The group meetings, the tentative dates for them are June 12th, June 26th, July 10th, and July 24th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., right? And so last but not least, if you are awarded, we expect you to work closely with your students, right? Whether it's on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, is up to you, but we want to see you involved with your students, providing feedback, actively mentoring them, right? That's why we're doing this, right? We are the undergraduate research office, right? And so keep that in mind. So to kind of wrap this up, write to the rubric, make sure that people outside of your discipline could understand. Make sure that you convey the importance, the significance, enthusiasm for the project, for mentoring students, for undergraduate engagement, right? And if you have that record of undergraduate engagement, make sure that you let us know about this, right? If you need to contact us about questions, about details, if there's details that you might not be clear on, you have questions about budget, about submissions, etc., our email is curca@ung.edu. So that is our presentation. We're going to stop the recording now, and then we're going to turn to questions that you may have about this.